All right, that's going. This is going. Welcome back, everyone. We apologize for the last 13 minutes of our last podcast. The audio thing happened. We don't know why that did, but we're going to keep an eye on it this time.
We got eyes on the audio this time.
So I guess this is episode 8 by now.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, because we filmed 3 episodes tonight.
Yeah.
In the same location, and yeah, we're scooting right along. I hope you guys are liking the episodes. I hope you're liking the short clips that are coming along. I'm going to try to kind of dress those up a little bit and edit them real nice so that they can just be good tidbits there. So for this episode, I promised you last time I was going to tell you something interesting about caffeine.
Yeah.
So, we try to be non-controversial on this channel. And if we talk about a study, that's something you can look up, but you should definitely fact check everything we say because we are experts in some things like film and storytelling and writing and pretty close to expert in ADHD and stuff like that. But we're not doctors, we're not psychologists. So definitely you should, look into anything that you have a question of and definitely should fact check us. But I can tell you that when we do reference a study, if you ever want the name of that study, we can definitely track it down for you.
Yeah.
We're never going to talk about a study that doesn't exist. It's one that we've read.
Any questions in the comments, we'll go find it.
We definitely will go find it. And so this is a very interesting study because it had to do with caffeine. Now, we talked about caffeine in our last episode.
Yeah.
And people have a lot of different feelings about caffeine. I personally feel differently about caffeine depending on what stage of life I'm in, but I use it a lot. I haven't used it for about 2 weeks now because that felt like the thing to do. Just like medication, sometimes it's good for me, sometimes it's not, and everybody's going to be different. In my opinion, caffeine is just another medication to be used with research and level-headedness. But something that's really interesting is I was researching this for a video on TikTok. Mm-hmm. Brains are interesting things. And there's a lot about the brain that we don't understand.
Ooh, I'd love to get into that.
Most of I'd say about the brain we don't understand. But there are some interesting differences between the brains of neurodivergent people and the brains of neurotypical people.
Okay.
And this is news because usually before, finding an actual root cause, or not even cause, but just a difference in somebody was difficult because even the dopamine thing, sometimes ADHD people had just as much dopamine as other people, so maybe it had to do more with the receptors than the chemical, and it's pretty hard to track down.
Right.
But this study, actually 4 or 5 different studies, were all done on young people with ADHD. And so the differences in the brain between neurotypical and neurodivergent people were greater as children and less as adults.
Really?
So there was less difference between adult brains, neurotypical and neurodivergent, more difference in children. And that kind of makes sense if you think about the things you have to learn and do and the way your brain has to adapt when you get older. But some of these differences were interesting. For example, size. So there were 2 regions of the brain in neurodivergent people that were slightly smaller in size than neurotypical people. This was the amygdala and the hippocampus.
Okay.
Now this makes sense because these are parts of the brain that are responsible for emotional regulation and impulsivity.
Right.
So it would make sense if those parts of the brains, I don't want to say were underdeveloped, but smaller, than people that are neurotypical.
Right.
Another difference was blood flow in the brain.
Okay.
So there were certain regions of the brain, specifically the frontal and prefrontal areas, that in neurodivergent people had less blood flow in them than neurotypical people. That's interesting because the frontal areas of the brain are where our executive functioning comes from.
Yeah.
And the executive function was one of the things that neurodivergent people struggle with.
Yeah. Huh.
Now, the most interesting thing is there are differences. So parts of our brain are connected to other parts of our brain.
Yeah.
So our visual system is connected to things that help us make decisions and everything because you see something and it has a reaction. Neurodivergent brains have different connections than neurotypical brains.
Okay.
So neurotypical brains have parts of the brain that are connected to each other. Neurodivergent people have other parts of the brain that are connected to other parts of the brain. So I forgot exactly the example, but it was in neurotypical people, the vision is connected to certain parts of the brain that it's disconnected from in neurodivergent people, but those connections are connected to other parts of the brain. And so, the different parts of your brain do different things. But that's why, for example, neurodivergent people maybe are more likely to have synesthesia. If you've heard of synesthesia, that's when people say, like, I taste colors, or I see music, or it's two senses that are crossed over. It's because potentially, they're still studying this, it's potentially because there are different parts of the brain that are connected that aren't customarily connected. So the things that you associate with other things are going to be different for neurodivergent people, which also gives rise to higher levels of creativity, artisticness, color, vision, usual like musical ability and stuff like that. And this isn't everybody who's neurodivergent, but it is often you'll see like general trends of more creativity, and things like that. So those are some very, very interesting like brain differences that, again, not every single person with ADHD had these differences. They just studied a bunch of children with ADHD and a bunch of neurotypical children, and they found these trends in differences. So if you're ADHD, that doesn't mean that your hippocampus is smaller than a neurotypical person's necessarily. It's just that if you took 1,000 ADHD kids and 1,000 neurotypical kids, the trends will be that it is smaller. So, but there are also other parts that were interesting, that were potentially more developed to compensate for those things. And that's,
and that's what's fascinating about that. When it comes to brain science, it is very difficult to separate cause and effect.
Yeah, totally.
Right? The fact that one part of the brain is larger could be as much a result of some other cause as it could be the cause.
And I want to tell everybody right now that as far as brain size goes, our brains currently are about a tennis ball of mass smaller than human brains were 20,000 years ago.
Right.
And so I wouldn't say that we're less intelligent than people 20,000 years ago. I wouldn't say we're much more intelligent. We have access to a lot more information. We do keep less of that information in our heads and more of that information in our devices, but maybe our brains...
Than even 100 years ago.
Totally, yeah. Maybe our brains became more efficient. Maybe there's a lot of reasons for it. Neanderthals actually had the largest brains out of any human species ever. So we don't know for sure. Brain size is...
And brain to body mass, I think dolphins are the winners right now.
Totally, yeah.
And
they used to actually use that to be misogynistic towards women by saying women's had smaller brain
heads.
And they certainly are not less intelligent than men are.
Right. We've amply proven that. Well, and measuring intelligence has caused its own problems.
Yes,
so.
And what intelligence is and how we define intelligence is its own thing.
It's its own thing.
There are different types of intelligence, and knowing facts isn't necessarily what that is.
It's interesting. So one thing that we're going to probably be talking about in the next few months will include a book that I've written.
Yes.
And we're going to try to get that published in the next few months.
Yep.
And it's going to be a partnership between myself as an author and Thunderfeather, because it'll help us with some other things that we do. But what's really great about what we're talking about is I wrote this book as a result of hearing the idea that if you tell a fish that only flying animals are smart, they will go through their whole life thinking they're dumb.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write a book that was basically that.
Okay.
Like proof. It's a fantasy novel. It is in a world of
sneak peek.
It's a world of magic hidden within our world.
This is the one I read, right?
Yeah.
It's really good. In case you're wondering, it's really good.
Pretty common theme, but one of the themes that goes throughout is intentionally, if you call one trait the best and say everyone who doesn't have that trait is therefore not the best, that it creates a very strange society that can actually hurt itself.
Yes, yeah. Like if, for example, your society is all about how well you can do math or the sciences or the hard sciences, things like emotional intelligence or like the human skills, the soft skills are going to be looked at as less than, which to a degree has happened in a lot of communities probably in our society.
Yeah.
When in reality, like what's more valuable? Like the skills that lead to medicine and science, or the skills that lead to human relationships that are our reason for living. So you can't really compare those two. They're just totally two different entire worlds.
Or is it more? Do we add arts into there?
Yeah. The weird caffeine fact that I promised you guys.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's because I was researching this, because I started wondering about blood flow in the brain and neurodiversity. And I'm always like, am I going to crack the code and find something new? And I'm not a scientist or a doctor or anything like that.
Passionate amateur.
Passionate amateur for sure. But like, if our prefrontal cortex is experiencing less blood flow, therefore it's affecting our executive dysfunction, our executive function.
Sure.
And maybe that's that we already had the problem with the executive dysfunction, and then we're experiencing less blood flow because of it. Either way, I'm not saying the blood flow causes ADHD,
right.
But if higher blood flow in the brain helps us have higher executive function, I started thinking about like, what are things that can increase the blood flow in the brain, which is good for everybody.
Right.
Because that is just a healthy thing. So, inversions, so being upside down, doing handstands, exercise is one of the main things, which everybody knows that's good for you. For
yoga is a little of both.
Yeah.
For what it's worth.
Meditation and prayer actually significantly increases the blood flow in your brain.
Okay.
Either or.
I totally believe that.
Either or. And here's the weird thing.
They're very similar.
Caffeine decreases the blood flow in your brain if you're awake. If you're asleep, it increases the blood flow in your brain. And I have no idea why that's the case. It was this study that I read. But it's kind of like, I was struggling with that when I'm like, should I give up caffeine because I'm trying to increase my brain blood flow? But caffeine's the main thing that works for me with ADHD. And I think that that's the sort of thing that each individual person just needs to evaluate and do a risk analysis, kind of like pro cons of how it's helping me out. But like they often say, people with ADHD can just drink caffeine and go right to bed. I wonder if it's like our body realizing, oh, and I'll have that increased blood flow and my brain will be able to work better. So
it is interesting because there's a genetic trait for that as well.
Sure.
For not being caffeine sensitive.
Totally. Yeah.
And I actually have that trait.
Okay.
Because I'm the same way. I have a lot of caffeine right before bed and I sleep just fine.
Interesting, yeah. But you don't necessarily have all the other symptoms of ADHD.
But that's the other thing about caffeine is I don't get much reaction to any of it
at all.
So the fact that I preach caffeine, you should stay away from it. You lose a lot of the not motivation, but credibility when you realize that I don't feel any effects of caffeine.
Sure, yeah. It's a nuanced issue when it comes to those sorts of things. I have another friend who, she spent most of her life thinking she had ADHD, and a little later in life got diagnosed with bipolar.
Okay.
And it's because the outward manifestations can look very similar at a manic episode of bipolar and ADHD. And that's something that sadly happens to girls and women a lot, is that they won't be diagnosed as young as boys will be often, because of the literature that has been made and some of the cultural things in sort of our medical understanding of ADHD and autism as well. But often because of the societal situations, girls will kind of present less on the outside, the ADHD sort of side of things, because it's less socially acceptable for them to be rambunctious or whatever it is.
And women tend to be wired for relationships and connection.
It's like I need to preserving this relationship. I'm not going to overstep boundaries. Maybe a little boy won't be as careful with that. There's a lot of reasons, but we do know that it is less likely to get diagnosed if you are a woman, and that should change, and that is changing, and that's good news. So with my friend, she was finally diagnosed with bipolar, and drinking any caffeine at all is catastrophic. For her specifically. I don't know for other people with bipolar, but she has medication for bipolar because you treat ADHD and bipolar very differently. So it was really good that she got the correct diagnosis. But anytime she's tried caffeine, it's like borderline psychosis almost. It's something she should not be doing at all. Whereas you can drink it and feel nothing. So really, there is no definitive answer if you should be drinking caffeine or not. You should definitely be safe with whatever you're doing, and do a lot of research, talk to doctors and professionals.
And recognize that even in a beverage, even casually, it is a drug.
Yeah, totally.
Just like sugar's a drug. Sugar ends up being a drug.
Everything in our body, all our neurotransmitters are drugs.
Right.
And
excess and abstinence can cause problems.
Yes, totally.
Caffeine abstinence, I mean, again, if it working for self-regulation, that could be a problem.
Totally, yeah.
Right?
And like for me, there are times in my life where not being medicated is a problem, where I need that in medication. And for me, my philosophy is that I medicate to the point where I can develop the skills so that I can go on medicated or not. Like that's where I like to be. It's not always the case. Sometimes there's stressful situations or circumstances where my symptoms are a little worse and I need a little more help, and I think that's okay because it's not every day, it's not all the time, it's not forever. And if it is, for some people take medication every day for the rest of their lives, and that's great because isn't it cool that a medication was made to give them a higher quality of life? So we're totally pro medication on this channel. If it's something that you need, it's something that's good for you. And I think that getting rid of the taboo of medication and taking medication is something that's good and should be further explored. But this brain blood flow thing has really been interesting to me because this is something that you for sure, I don't even know if I want to say this on the podcast. It's true. There's a lawsuit about it, but they're still doing studies. Anyway, I'm not going to say it.
I was going to say you can preface with that.
Heavy disclaimer. This is not a conspiracy theory. There is a lawsuit currently about this. And I'm wondering if it's connected to the blood flow thing, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. Please fact check this on your own. Do not take this as truth.
And not connected to the lawsuit.
And not connected to the lawsuit, not connected to anything. I have no connection there. But it is that acetaminophen taken while pregnant significantly increases the chance of having a child with ADHD or autism.
Really?
And I have no idea why. There's a lot of study. There's a lawsuit right now, actually class action lawsuit against it. What's interesting is like the lawsuit's a little bit insulting to me because I'm like, there's nothing wrong with me. I just have a different brain.
Break me.
There's nothing wrong with autistic people that have a different brain. And like, are these autistic and ADHD people who just have a little, higher level of symptoms because of the acetaminophen? I have no idea. Again, I'm not an expert. But it made me think about the blood flow thing because we also don't know what acetaminophen does at all or how it works. We just know that it does.
Right.
And that if you take it while you're pregnant, higher chance that your kid will have ADHD or autism.
Right.
And again, who knows why?
And again, cause and effect.
We don't know.
Even if we've established that it could be increased stress.
Totally. There could be a lot of reasons why.
It's related to why you were taking it.
It could be the pain, the reason why you were taking it in the first place. We have no idea. I'm not taking a stance on that one way or another. But I find it interesting because of this blood flow thing in the brain, which again, I also don't know if it's true or not. I just know that certain areas of the brain in people with ADHD have less blood flow than people that are neurotypical. Those are the executive parts of the brain. And so I'm working on a theory about what happens when you increase the blood flow. I still don't know. But what's really interesting is that the sutures in your skull don't fully close until your mid-20s. I always thought that they closed earlier, like a baby has a very soft head.
But
the main...
not sutures, but...
the
plates.
The plates, yeah. The sutures are what they call in between the plates.
Do they call them sutures?
They call them sutures, yeah.
I always thought that was just what you'd call like something.
It also is.
Sutures. Okay.
But yeah, so the plates don't fully fuse, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's right because I just read it, but if I'm wrong, somebody fact check me. Yeah, they don't fully close until between 21 and 25, depending on who you are.
Okay.
What's really interesting about that is a lot of people's neurodivergence, like mine, even though I had it my whole life, my symptoms increased significantly, and there could be a lot of reasons for that. Right around that time, people's mental health changes around that time. There's a lot of things that change.
Mid-20s, yeah.
But there's a lot going on in your mid-20s. There's a lot of other factors of why that could happen. But I'm wondering, I want to study this brain suture thing.
Yeah, that is
interesting. And what is really actually interesting about it is and this is totally out there. Do not do this. But there are a lot of ancient skulls with holes drilled in their heads.
Sure.
Trepanation.
Yeah.
And for different reasons. For migraines, they thought, for maybe religious reasons, to release the demons or whatever.
Right.
But one of the theories is that it was to relieve intense mental health symptoms or things like that.
Well, yeah, if you're getting rid of demons.
Sure. Maybe
a lot of times now we believe what were called demons.
Sure. And maybe it just had something to do with the pressure on
and
your
so
brain.
there might have actually
Might have
been
actually
working.
Yeah. And I don't know for sure. That's something to study. There's a lot of good people studying that, but it kind of lends to the theory that there could be something about the pressure on your brain. And thankfully, there's a lot better ways to deal with that nowadays. If it's a problem, than drilling a hole in your head, and doctors can figure out better things about that. But if it does have to do with the blood flow and pressure, I mean, like, again, exercise is going to help. Handstands, going inverted is going to help. Healthy diet's going to help. Meditation, low stress is going to help. And then there are supplements that also help with the blood flow in your brain. Obviously, if you're going to take supplements, you should also talk to your doctor. But those are things that, like, I'm currently researching. Now, I'm not trying to cure neurodiversity at all. That's not where I'm coming from. I do know some people talk about these things with that in mind. I'm always just looking for, like, for me personally, what are ways that help my personal symptoms? And exercise really helps for probably a million different reasons.
Right.
Caffeine helps sometimes. Eating a very healthy diet helps me. Getting enough sleep and hydration, all those things you've heard. And then building a toolbox of specific things that help me get through my day also helps. So that's just one of the things I've been researching that I thought was interesting.
And honestly, touching on that subject, we're not curing neurodiversity.
No, there's nothing to cure.
It gets back to why being called neurotypical just rubs me the wrong way so often. Is that what you are trying to do is find, I would guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the idea of not having the benefits of your neurodiversity so that you wouldn't have executive dysfunction or these other things.
Oh yeah, I would never trade it.
Right.
I would never, ever, ever, ever trade it in the world, because the benefits have not just... And the benefits that have come from overcoming the adversity, not just the creativity-based benefits, but even just the things I've had to overcome and build because of it. My entire life is based on that.
Yeah.
The entire organization of Thunderfeather, my entire career, everything about how I approach life and all the stories I tell and all the creativity, I attribute a great deal of that to my neurodiversity. So even given all the challenges, which have not been few, I'd never trade it.
Right. But what it comes down to is, what we want is essentially to be in a place where you are happy.
Yes, totally.
Right. And you can make the decisions that you want to.
Yeah. And this is what I'm noticing about that is, like, my symptoms, and when I say symptoms, I mean the things that impede me, right? So the things that maybe give me challenges in life. My challenges associated with my neurodiversity flare up under certain circumstances. And those certain circumstances are like when I feel like I'm in a bad place financially, when I feel like my relationships are bad, and when I feel like I'm not fulfilling my purpose in life. And so I'm trying to get to the point where those things shouldn't matter. I'm still okay. But most of my life, those things were okay. Like when I was growing up, I had all my needs met. My relationships felt okay. If they didn't, I would struggle a little bit, but my needs were met. I didn't have to worry about taxes. I didn't have to worry about a paycheck. I didn't have to worry about paying bills and everything. I didn't have to worry about a job or what I was going to do or how I was going to affect the world. And in fact, it's very interesting because even just now, I was in Europe for 2 weeks. And I traveled. I saw 9 different countries in 2 weeks. I took 5 cars, 12 planes, I think 6 trams, 8 trains, and 23 buses all around Europe for 2 weeks. And I had 0 issues with those challenges that usually come from neurodiversity. 0 issues. I was just like fully content, fully in the best place ever, and not even worried about it, excited about life, experiencing just like the highest level of contentment that I have. And I come home and almost immediately crash again. And it's not because I have things I don't care about working on. I'm working on Thunderfeather. I'm working on creative projects. I don't know if it's the fact that I spend a lot of time by myself in my apartment, but I was also alone traveling. I met a lot of people every day. But like, I'm also like single, and I also have, I'm figuring out the business of Thunderfeather, and there's still many unknowns. And so it's kind of interesting for me to see how night and day that can be, that it's really nothing to do with me and so much to do with my environment, and that when I'm in the right environment, I can just thrive. And so I've identified 3 times and places in my life where I have absolutely no issues and can perform just pretty much anything. And that's when I'm traveling, when I am on set directing a movie or in the process of doing that, or when I'm at DPAC, which is the theater camp that we have every year. And
Yeah.
for some reason, those are the three situations where I just absolutely, like my symptoms, my challenges disappear completely. And so I'm kind of in the last like 7 years of my life, I've been in this particularly challenging stage where there's a lot of unknowns, where I don't know how the professional thing's going to work out, monetarily how it's going to work out, relationships, how those are going to work out, meaning romantic relationships. And thankfully I've had wonderful, siblings and friends and close people, but those people aren't with me every single day. They're with me maybe once a week or twice a week or something like that. So I've even found that, given the environment that I'm in, there's a significant difference. And so I don't see myself for the rest of my life being in the same sort of, I don't see myself having the same amount of challenges with my neurodiversity and the same sort of symptoms as I've had maybe the last 7 years. It's probably not going to be a problem for the rest of my life. But what will be cool is if I ever have a stage of my life again where things get incredibly challenging, I can rely on the tips and tricks that I'm building right now, that I've been building for the last 7 years, to know that I'll make it through. And I think that that's incredibly important to be able to do that. And it's a really cool realization that I made, to know most of my life, the vast majority of my life, these symptoms are not going to seriously impede me probably the way that they have the last 7 years. They'll always be in the way. They'll always be inconvenient, and they'll always be a source of maybe frustration and challenge.
Absolutely.
But challenges that are much more easily overcome than the last 7 years of my life. Not to just try to give you a sob story, but that's just the reality of starting a business, starting a nonprofit organization, doing something that's literally never been done in the history of the world, which is make a nonprofit that makes movies with neurodivergent actors. Nobody's ever done it. It's never been done. And that's hard. And it's been hard. So please subscribe to our channels.
And in the world's, in the world's defense, making movies isn't that old. So.
Not old at all. Well, you're right. 100 years. We're about 100 years in. That's a good point.
But it's true. It's absolutely new. We're both learning the craft as well as learning learning what's not part of the craft.
Totally, yeah.
And we don't have the luxury, or the luxury might. Oh, look, the sound stopped
at 19.
All right,
I wasn't watching.
Well, we can restart it.
Okay. I didn't even pause it. It just stopped.
It did just stop. It's like
the last one didn't. It went to 24. All right. I'm just going to say, is it a weird... Dang it. Now it's frozen up.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Uh-oh. Well, I hope we have it. Well, the camera takes audio.
We use the camera.
I apologize for the
change.
The change in audio. I'll put a little note up that you'll see. But we're also 27 minutes in, so we should probably wrap this up.
Should probably wrap it up too. So, well, obviously we have a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
A lot of interesting things. What would our summary of this one be?
Oh, I don't know. We talked about a lot of stuff.
We did talk about a lot of things.
I feel like neurodiversity, as everything in life, is a journey. And that journey is not going to look like anybody else's. But just because we're on different journeys doesn't mean we can't find commonality in the fact that we are all on a journey.
On a journey.
And we can share our successes and things that work. And they might work differently for you, but it's worth sharing. And we're in this together.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I would say, based on just the end of our conversation, is, if nothing else, we hope we can give you hope. That there are skills you can learn that can lead you to a future that is more like the one you're hoping for.